Greetings and welcome for all of you tuned in. You're watching TMH's Daily English News. Our headlines for today: the government of Tigray calls on WFP and says that their head's allegation of what they called to be stolen fuel baseless. U.S. urges talks between Ethiopia and the Tigray forces to end renewed conflict, and peace process is supposedly dead as the fragile ceasefire in Ethiopia renowned global affairs, as researchers say. The government of Tigray denies having stolen any fuel tankers. In a statement it issued today, the government of Tigray said Beasley's allegations of stolen fuel is just baseless. Again, in a statement issued today, the government of Tigray said it is profoundly disturbed by the comments of WFP's executive director David Beasley's unhelpful public outburst accusing the government of Tigray on quote-unquote stealing fuel tankers that belonged to the WFP. The government of Tigray disclosed that it had loaned over 600,000 liters of fuel to the WFP, and it simply demanded that it be paid back in accordance with the agreement that they reached a few months ago. The understanding was that the WFP would pay back the fuel in kind, since the government of Tigray cannot run hospitals, schools, and other public services without the necessary fuel. The government of Tigray said its decision to loan the fuel to the WFP, appropriately documented, was driven by its appreciation of the gravity of the humanitarian catastrophe that the Abiy Ahmed regime had engineered. Nonetheless, the trade-off involved in exhausting our fuel reserve by loaning over 600,000 liters of fuel to WFP was that we severely compromised our ability to provide even the limited services to our people that we could, as the statement noted, adding that the fuel would be used to run basic services such as hospitals, clinics, and other health facilities across Tigray that have been looted and damaged by the invading forces. While the incident at the heart of Beasley's allegations and facts surrounding it are being handled with WFP's local representatives, his far-reaching ramifications for humanitarian operations across Tigray, exposing millions of Tigrayans to an elevated risk of additional pain and suffering. The statement stressed that the government of Tigray indicated that the Abiy Ahmed's regime had already latched onto Beasley's words to discredit the humanitarian operations within the Tigray region, and it hoped that WFP in general and Beasley in particular would see the errors of their ways and refrain from being unwitting accessories in the Abiy Ahmed's regime on ongoing strangulation of Tigray's region and its people. It also said that they rather press the Abiy Ahmed's regime to allow sufficient fuel into the Tigray region, as the WFP in particular and the UN in general have been coddling since the beginning of this conflict. The statement also added that having borrowed hundreds of thousands of liters of fuel, the WFP is unilaterally revising the terms of this deal, essentially arguing that it did not know the fuel provided was to be paid back in kind. But on the contrary, this protest in the 13th of January in 2022, in a situations report by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, in fact indicated that the food aid will be dispatched from Ma'ala to the affected population with fuel loaned from the local authorities. It could not get any clearer than this, as the statement concluded. Moving on to our next news. U.S. urges talks between Ethiopia and Tigray forces and the renewed conflict. As the resumption of hostilities continues to steamroll, the United States on Wednesday urged the Ethiopia's government and Tigray forces to hold talks to end renewed fighting, saying that 5 months' truce had saved countless and countless of lives. We are concerned by reports of renewed hostilities in Ethiopia, and we call on the government of Ethiopia and the TPLF to redouble efforts to advance talks to achieve a durable ceasefire without preconditions. State Department spokesman Vedant Patel said, referring to the rebuilt Tigray People's Liberation Front. He also said the United States was ready to work with the Ethiopians, both on diplomacy as well as humanitarian assistance, with a goal to ultimately bring a permanent end to the conflict. In related news, Representatives Gregory Milks and Michael McCall, chair and ranking members of the House of Foreign Affairs Committee, issued a statement urging all sides to de-escalate tensions immediately and adhere to the ceasefire, as well as return to the negotiating table immediately. They also called on their partners in the international community to remain focused on prompting a peaceful end to this ongoing crisis. Tigray's government representative in Europe also said the peace process between Ethiopian government and Tigray's People Liberation Front has failed because of Abiy Ahmed's false promises and deceptive approach. Aklilu Haile Mikhail, official representative of the government of Tigray to Europe and former state minister of foreign affairs of Ethiopia, made the remark in an article he published today. He listed a litany of false promises that Abiy Ahmed made that led to the failure of the peace process, including his promise to the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres over a year ago that he would lift this ongoing siege on the Tigray region. And on the promise of Abiy Ahmed that the siege would be lifted, Tigray Defense Forces withdrew from Afar. Aklilu said Abiy, for the second time, has reneged on his promise. Tigray released more than 4,200 prisoners of war in response to the request of the peace envoys, particularly the African Union. Abiy denied the people of war are his soldiers and has put those released in solitary confinement, with the objectives of facilitating humanitarian assistance, including the resumption of basic services. Both sides declared cessation of hostilities in March this year, and Abiy, for the fourth time, has broken his word and continued the total blockade and unimpeded humanitarian access as well. In a meeting that took place in Djibouti on the 13th of June this year, in the presence of the key players in the global politics, an agreement was reached between both parties to put in place a system for the unfettered humanitarian access aid to the Tigray region, including fertilizer and fuel, and the restart of all basic services in 2 weeks' time after the announcement of readiness for negotiations by the Prosperity Party. Besides the two sides agreeing to resolve the issues surrounding Western Tigray in the context of the constitution for the Eritrean and the Amhara forces to withdraw. These promises were documented by the representatives of the interlocutor and that facilitated the meeting, and Abiy Ahmed again broke these promises. Abiy requested for security guarantee to technicians coming to Tigray to restart these basic services, and Tigray gave a written assurance on the 2nd of August in 2022 to the regime via the special envoys and other members of the international community who visited Ma'ala and was expecting a response from the authorities in Addis, but to no avail. The representatives wrote Abiy has never had a genuine interest in peace, but has been using peace talks as a delaying tactic to buy time for another round of military offense against the Tigray peoples, which he eventually launched on the 24th of August, 2022. Our final update for today: peace process is dead, as the fragile ceasefire in Ethiopia, says Alex de Waal. Alex de Waal, executive director of the World Peace Foundation and research professor at Fletcher School of Global Affairs and Tufts University, PM Abiy, has used starvation as a weapon while negotiations have sputtered due to mistrust and weak international oversight. The long-anticipated renewed round of war between the federal government of Ethiopia against the Tigrayans began at the dawn of 24th of August. The first shots were fired on the southern borders of Tigray near the town of Almata. Each side blames the other for firing them. According to de Waal, even more culpable are the international players that have backed a peace process in name only for the last 12 months, hiding behind a casual, complacent African Union High Representative, General Olusegun Obasanjo of Nigeria, who shows neither an understanding of the complexities of the Ethiopian crisis nor an appetite for engaging with them. The process is now dead. Appeals for restraint will fall on deaf ears, said de Waal, underlining that the new fighting is likely to escalate on all fronts. Critically for Tigray's 7 million people, the fighting spells an end to an immediate prospect of negotiated lifting of the siege that has reduced them to starvation, costing up to 500,000 lives already since the war began in November of 2020. As recently as July, there was hopeful signs of peace talks. Secret meetings brokered by the United States between the military officers in Seychelles and senior civilians in Djibouti reached preliminary agreements. The plan was for these to become formal, with public talks hosted by Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta and the AU's Obasanjo playing a role alongside them. Alex DeWall wrote that as the talks stalled, the Tigrayans have stuck to their demands for ending the siege before negotiating a permanent ceasefire, while the federal government has wanted it to the other way around, backtracking on promises to restore all of these services. Alex DeWall did say Abiy Ahmed's probably rightly assumed that time was on his side. With every passing month, Tigrayans starve while relations between Addis Ababa and the international donors stumble towards something approaching normality. But DeWall said that a high-risk strategy will fail. If there is a silver lining to the eruption of fighting on the Tigray's border, it is that it demonstrates that the current international approach to ending the war and the famine has reached a dead end. Ethiopians need something better. There's a vacuum to be filled, he said. According to DeWall, only a high-level US-led initiative, which includes the Europeans and the Gulf states, can eventually break this impasse at this stage. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye-bye.